Hello, and welcome to another video. This video is going to be relatively long compared to my other videos. And for the most part, it's just a talking video. So if you guys are interested in just alt-tabbing or not really paying attention to it, this is one of those videos where I'm talking the whole time and we're going to be going over basically balancing PvP. So if you guys are interested in balance in the state of SWTOR PvP, this is a good video for you. But also it serves as an educational video for those who are unaware and or a developer that is unaware. I'm going over problems and solutions and some other things overall. So do take that with a grain of salt if you're not really interested in this topic. Feel free to skip the video, I don't mind. Anyway, getting into it, going into the depth of how balance in PvP is completely out of tune, including some classes that will affect, or not classes, but some issues that will affect and are already affecting PvP due to poor balancing. Starting off, everyone hears we have a fast time to kill and damage is too high. But what does that mean? If you're someone not certain or unconvinced, this is a great video for you because I will go over everything currently wrong and how the game would change if they were to make it better or worse. To give extreme examples of fast time to kill and high burst, we have advanced prototype and engineering sniper to showcase it. Both of these classes will kill you through mostly every single defensive you have and much quicker than most of the other classes will. Exceptions of other burst examples are Rage Juggernaut, Carnage Marauder, and Deception Assassin. While they won't do it as fast as the two I'm showcasing, they will do it exceptionally well. But they are much easier to peel, unlike the ones that I will showcase here. And I'll show you guys engineering's burst windows here. There's two clips of it. I don't like playing the class too much, but there are some much better examples and videos that I have. But at the same time, you kind of get the general idea. So engineering, as you can see, I make this person's health bar disappear. Well, we've had instances of burst being this high. We haven't had it when heals were so weak as they are now. And we also haven't had it when defensive power was this low. This creates a very rough situation for anyone new to the game and some specific classes' ability to play the game as their prime targets for getting hit with things like this. There is little to no skill nor player ability involved in hitting buttons in a simple order and getting a promised critical hit via a button press. That hits on average 150,000 tied with another ability that will pop at the same time for 35 to 75,000, making hits on average over 200,000 each activation. While it is two abilities at once, it's hard to defend against with the current defenses we have in game, and with it being spread out once again, it would immediately make it less aggressive and slow down sand kill. I don't think it needs a nerf, but rather a damage split instead of sabotage or EMP discharge going off with explosive probe at the same time. Typically when something goes off at the same time, that really creates unhealthy bursts because most players in the game are not going to react fast enough, and most of the time eventually somebody's going to get them while they're not paying attention, and that amount of burst is just too much. While there are some other examples that can hit very hard just like this, they are not two abilities hitting at the same time. There's a reason why engineering's burst feels much more oppressive and much harder to deal with, especially when there's more than one in the match. Now to showcase advanced prototype, the main issue with this is that power yield since 6.0 power load tactical would reset energy load stacks, allowing you for back-to-back energy bursts. Now that power load tactical is baseline, you can do this for free. With that being said, it allows you to have insane burst windows tied with a delayed thermal and shoulder cannon. While it's easier to deal with in engineering as they're often too far away or often out of sight, as it doesn't require a line of sight for them to pop their burst. It's still incredibly strong. Now bring in the new tactical called Power Detonator. This makes it so you don't have to learn how to play advanced prototype to get the maximum yield of their burst windows, allowing for things like thermal and energy bursts to do their damage at the same time without actually timing it. It also allows thermal to sit on the target and not be popped during the defensive windows. for Spear being a prime example. So you could thermal into a defensive and wait for it to fall off and then pop it. So there's really no saving yourself from the promised burst window, thus making this the second tactical that is fundamentally unhealthy for the game and leaves little to no counter play. At least when playing without the tactical, the player has a chance to create some breathing room that isn't a complete disengage. Now, do keep in mind there is something else that's wrong with AP at the moment besides just damage. It has stealth scan, and their stealth scan works as a miniature diversion, and it basically has no downtime. I think the downtime is 1 second when the buff, so basically if you get hit by stealth scan, the lingering effect will be there for like 2 or 3 seconds. I think it's like 2.5 or something like that, or maybe 3. Basically the equivalent of 1 global cooldown, assuming that you're playing almost perfectly, and if you have high alacrity, it's probably almost 2. That's quite disruptive, even if you get out of it immediately. And the fact that they're able to do it pretty much every single time it goes away, which causes some issues when you stack it. And when you stack it, it's much easier to apply it to anybody that you want to apply it to. This is something very manipulative and abusive, and generally should have never made it into the game, much like Forcebound. Diversion is already a very strong ability. We don't need a class that is already extremely strong aggressively to have such a strong defensive utility, not only for itself, but its entire team. I will show you some AP clips here, or I guess, yeah, here is fine. Now that we've seen 2 extreme examples, we're on the same page how fast time to kill can be and how high damage can be. Well, I know most players aren't doing this, and it's not super common. Just one of these being played right is a complete game changer. More than one of these classes played at half capacity is more than equal to 1 being played correctly, which still holds true to my comment that if the class is played correctly, or even if it takes 2 players to play it correctly, it's a game changer. The response to these classes is difficult, and when together, they're decimating the entire enemy all game long. I have examples of this, but this one, without augments, is a perfect example as to why, even with augments, it's not really going to change the meta. I know that a lot of people are advocating for no augments, or there was at some point. It only makes classes who aren't performing much worse than what they were. The meta classes are meta for a reason because they have a lot of critical passives, and losing more critical is not going to help you. It's only going to help the classes that are already doing well. Anyway, I'll show you guys the thumbnail of that video, and I'll put a link in the description for obviously any of these videos if you guys want to check them out. Now moving on to next topic, getting into why I say healing is so weak. All previous expansions, HPS would nearly always blow away the highest damage per second. Even in AoE games, now a single target burst player can surpass good players' healing per second, effectively only negating one player's damage. Well, when there's multiple damage players, that isn't that helpful. Sure, I can create a kill fest and quicker based games, or quicker paced, not based, games. It just enforces meta play even further and demotivates players from playing healers. This is why part of the reason we don't see very many healers anymore, because it's not rewarding, it doesn't feel good, and they're relatively hard to play, at least for most players. For example, a healer's healing per second output outside of large AoE clump parses has relatively stayed really close to each other over the past 2 expansions. Dark Heal is a great example considering it's barely healed for more than it has since 5.0. This is something that affects PvE, but PvE is actually designed around this. PvP is not. Damage went up nearly double going into 6.0 and about 50% more in 7.0. The AoE potential went postal in 6.0 and went completely nuclear in 7.0. HPS has not caught up and doesn't have anything new or useful to handle these situations in either 6.0 and 7.0. While Revitalization has helped a lot for operative last expansion and would help a ton now, still, all healers lost utility or exceptional talents and set bonuses that help them respond to these issues last expansion. We also had great defensives and things like force bound to help band-aid the situation. If we didn't have force bound, games would have ended a lot faster. Last expansion, force bound was the ultimate band-aid that kind of hit a lot of these issues. They were there, you just didn't see them very much. Now, give them even less defensive power, which they had a lot last expansion, now we don't. The targets they're healing to also have less defensive power. Pretty much everybody across the board has less defensive power, so therefore healing is going to be inevitably harder. It makes it basically even more of a kill fest. I have videos on all these expansions. I will show you some videos I think that are specifically great at showcasing the issues that I talk about here on screen. So I'll show you a video from 5.0, 6.0, and 7.0, and show you like the differences in these matches where healing is very high in comparison to damage and how it slowly closes the gap. Well, some of these videos, healers aren't quite as good as DPS players, and some of these, but I'll try to find the best ones I can to share with you guys so you guys can watch those. I will link those in the comments instead of the description so you guys can have an easier time finding that, as there are a lot of links that I'll probably put in my description. Now, moving on to one of the more important things for enjoyment in the game right now for PvP is that we have a lot of weak classes. While all are playable, there are obvious classes who underperform and feel nearly unplayable at the best of times against meta classes. For those more unexperienced, they're completely unplayable at any sort of useful level for the team. A lot of these classes need their skill trees realigned, talent choices either made baseline or made more available, while also gaining more set bonuses or tacticals that are viable. The biggest problem classes that are functional sometimes but are too reliant on their PvE meta are Annihilation, Marksman, and Arsenal. They all rely on their PvE tactical to gain a large majority of their damage. In case of Annihilation, it is about 50% of its damage is reliant on the tactical and uptime. I can't quite give perfect examples on this, but I have some Annihilation footage from recent times where it really just goes to show it's a parsing spec and nothing more anymore, like how it used to be a powerhouse in 2.0. The kill potential isn't there because it hits for almost nothing on Annihilate majority of the time. When it does do something, it's barely higher than when it did on average last expansion. They're also all reliant on white damage, which accuracy is a massive problem when it comes to uptime specs like these. Even if you manage to get great uptime, you'll be blown out of the water due to misses by meta classes. The over-reliance on a bad designed tactical, premonition, agitating energies, spiteful saber, some aren't listed here, as I do not wish to talk about them at the moment, but there are plenty others. A general rework of the over-pruned and adding some utility or def back into those that basically have none now would go a long way to giving players more of a chance to fight back. Now, getting into the most important thing for newer players or players that are unaware, gearing. It's not quite in the worst state ever. Looking at Osis gearing, that's definitely the worst. It's not in a great state either. At least Osis had bolster that was actually functional, or at least more functional than it is now. With an exploit happening early on with bolster this expansion, we had to play without augments being functional. That time, damage was lower and things were a bit better overall, but it still made the obvious conclusion what was meta and what was not, leaving players in a situation of either being really good or really bad. Now, when they started working again, they benefited both players, but mainly the weaker classes that needed more critical more, as the meta classes already had passes for critical. Augments are still incredibly expensive, no cheap replacement for it made yet. And it's been quite a while since the best augment has been created. Our current best in slot augments are 300 yellows from last expansion, when we still had ranked as a format for farming for half the components we needed to create them. The other half being from PvE, which is still relevant to this day. They've consistently maintained a high price, and a player trying to get into PvP will either run suboptimal augments, I'm talking about blues, or none at all due to its pricing, because you would just be replacing purples, and purples are relatively expensive still. The reason why I say blues are suboptimal is because you actually lose more stats running blues for some reason, and I've reported this for the past year plus, and nothing's been done about it, but most of the other things that I've reported, bolster-wise, have actually been fixed. So if anybody, please, any developer, anybody capable of sending that information into them, fix blue augments. They do not give the right amount of stats when you go into a PvP instance. There's no reason for a poor player or a new player to be punished so severely for no reason at all. Now, why is it so bad that augments are so expensive, and why are augments even a thing if they're so bad? Well, if a stat squish was to happen, let's say going into 8.0, then it wouldn't really be a big issue. But unfortunately, we are in a state of game where augments account for thousands and thousands of secondary stat, power, and endurance. This leaves you at a deficit of 50,000 health on average if you're missing your augments. That's not good. Thousands of power and thousands of secondary stat is a huge damage gain, or healing gain, or protection gain, depending on what build you're trying to go for, which, by the way, mitigation still isn't that great. Anyway, getting into the starter gear for most people are green conquest gear. It's all HP heavy and offers more survivability than output. Output, my bad. This isn't helpful, and generally will make it feel like you can't hurt anyone in PvP and give up early, especially since if you're in this gear, you probably don't have augments, so you're at a massive disadvantage. I'm talking about like 6,000 to 7,000 power. I'm talking about like 10,000 mastery. I'm talking about like 14k to 15k endurance. And I'm talking about barely having 30% crit. These are some terrible stats, and you might even be missing the datacrons, you might be missing the companion story buffs, which is like 1% critical, 1% healing taking, 1% critical hit damage, I think, 1% accuracy. Missing these things you probably aren't aware of, and you're probably missing the 1% endurance too. That was another one. These things that you're probably not aware of, and you're at such a huge disadvantage, and it just doesn't feel good. You're not going to hurt people. You probably can't afford your set bonus implants because they're so expensive as a new player, or as, you know, a player trying to switch classes, or they just don't have much agency with the game because they haven't been playing for a long time, or they haven't played the game ever. And there's a lot of different systems that they're going to have to jump through to learn this. And then also at the same time, even if you do manage to get that, you have a tactical, and then you have a talent loadout. There's a lot of talents that are actually just dead talents that nobody takes, and there's a reason why nobody takes them, because they're not good. But how is a new player going to know that? How is a new player going to know that they need more survival versus having a force choke, for example? I'm looking at Marauder here. The point is that they're not going to know, and PvP is going to be a shell shock for them, and they're probably not going to enjoy their time. So having issues like this is just not good. Hide and seek is mainly used by PvEers, are mainly used for PvPers, I mean not PvEers, and casual PvEers. Well, PvEers do use it, it's mainly casuals. It's not a system designed for high-end PvEers, mostly because they still use the actual piece of gear, because the actual piece of gear is higher than the modded available. So that means, why is there a purple enhancement and a blue enhancement, and why are the mods blue and the armorings blue when it's been notoriously for over a decade now that purple has always been the best? Doesn't really make sense. We should probably just get rid of the whole ideal of modded gear being blue. Probably just do away with that completely and make it purple, and or vice versa, make it blue. Doesn't really matter. And remove the two different versions of enhancements and allow the purple statted one to take over for the previous tier. Just make them unified in one color so people aren't confused that, hey, they're running HP heavy enhancements and have no ideal, which, by the way, if you are running blue enhancements, they are HP heavy. Please get the purple one. So one thing that could help with this situation is to give a starter set of PvP gear when you do an introduction to PvP. Obviously, I feel like this should be probably reset every single time that PvP item level goes up. I know that there's definitely a system in place that would allow that. So if you could just give everybody a starter PvP set when they do the introduction to PvP and reset introduction to PvP every single time there's a new season, that would greatly help everybody getting into PvP and or people that wanted to play an alt or just play a new character or just wanted to try PvP for the first time. It would be it'd be greatly helpful. Sorry. I know that I'm going slightly on a tangent here. I don't think this is a developer's fault. I just feel like they're not aware of it. And I'm trying to share information with them. I think they do a wonderful job. I just don't think they're really aware of a lot of this stuff. And when they try to learn about a lot of this stuff, they just get shunned out by toxicity, which is not great. So I'm trying to be as constructive as possible and helpful as possible. So with giving a full set of basic PvP gear to players when they're first getting into it will allow them to not only be more competitive, they will have to grind less. The grind for PvP I don't think is all that bad, but I do think there should be more resources of the Warzone accommodations. I think you should be allowed to earn the Warzone accommodations and tech fragments, maybe rebalance things if you're going to allow tech fragments in low-level PvP. I think maybe even adding tech fragments as an actual reward for winning the game or losing the game, like maybe give like 25 for a loss or 10 for a loss and give you like 100 for a win or something like that to greater incentivize winning and or just playing the game, especially for Arena 2. I think this would be a great way to add passive income to PvP, but also give reasons to play it while you're leveling, so you can build currency up for when you actually do hit max level or to help gear out your other max levels. So for example, let's say you have a max level but it doesn't have any gear and you don't really want to PvP without gear. You could just play a whole bunch of PvP at low level, get enough currency, and slowly buy out your character. I know, for example, back when we had Warzone accommodations, this is something that I did. But expertise was a thing then. Expertise is not a thing anymore, and it doesn't need to exist, but it could. But the whole idea of awarding lower level PvP would be a good ideal because it would allow players to get into the in-game PvP a lot easier. And then obviously as a side effect for this, just to help with gearing, I do think we should probably at least allow first time characters or first time anything, like say you've completed the quest for introduction to PvP and you get a first time weekly. With that first time weekly, once you've completed it, give them a free tactical that's meta for PvE for their class. Just give it to them for free. Just do that. And what I mean by meta, even if the meta tactical is not, like I guess, meta for PvP, it would still be beneficial because it'll increase their damage. And if they don't have any other alternatives, it will suffice. Life Warden is not usually a great example, but Life Warden should probably be given for free for players that first time do the first weekly for Arena. Life Warden is actually very useful in third round and can change the game quite a bit. Now with that out of the way, talking about set bonuses and plants. A lot of them are not innovative and generally very basic, but I'm not here to criticize that. I am more so wanting to say that these things are expensive, especially when you first get into it. I think generally having the first purchase being way cheaper and giving it more of like a back-end cost, or normally when you would swap it around you would say front load. I don't know the word for the reverse of front load. Like add more of the cost to the end of the upgrades, but lower cost for the beginning. Especially even for like the first one, maybe have like it super cheap for the first one, So you can at least get implants and try these implants and see if you actually like them or not, but also allow it to have, you know, if it's a Lethality implant, allow it to be critical and vice versa. Having different stats on the implants is just in general more helpful. Even allowing accuracy, then for tank stats, like swap the tank stats that have different variations of the tank stats. That would be greatly helpful because there are some builds that, you know, sometimes they're not going to involve accuracy, sometimes it's going to involve alacrity or critical. If you're a madman like me, there's a couple builds that I want to try that has 0 critical. And I've already done a couple of videos on that, so if you guys want to watch that, feel free. But generally, just having more agency over your character stats is a great thing. Now, sorry for that ramble. I definitely went a little all over there, but there's a lot of things that just need to be said. Now that we're mostly past balance, I know that I didn't go into depth on each single like class, and with experience in every single class, I still don't think I am qualified to truly speak on any of them. Everything is going to be unbalanced, and it's not my place to worry about something like that. I can only point out what's obviously wrong, and it does not take a degree nor tons of experience to see it. I'm merely stating the obvious as a PvPer's point of view. I just happen to be very experienced in all PvP and classes in the game. However, I am not using that to do anything other than to hopefully give it a voice of reason. Now, while this has very little to do with game balance, but purely PvP balance, the matchmaking system needs help. While I don't think it needs complete rework, a simple limit to 4-man once again would make things work, functionality-wise, better. Less 5 to 6 to 7 mans would allow for more pre-made versus pre-made, and it would also allow these groups to be filled a lot easier and less bug players being sucked into it. And this would also giving basically every solo player a bit of a more easy time than having to deal with pre-mades all the time. I know the matchmaking is never going to work perfectly, and it's very easy to avoid other pre-mades. Just in general, the whole pre-made system is rough, and if it was limited 4 like it used to be, things would be much more tame. Obviously, there would still be pre-mades that would try to queue together and get together on the same team, but there are other things that we could do to fix that. Now, if an entire rework was proposed, I have a short video covering how I think it should be done. I'll show that and I'll link that in the comment. Basically, the too long didn't read of this video is that we have metric trackers in game already and they're visible, so why not use them as a way to balance matchmaking? If the person meets X amount of damage, healing, or protection thresholds, put them against each other. If someone doesn't... If somebody doesn't meet these thresholds, try not to. It's a simple concept that would separate those who are still learning, or they're new, or purely objective players who don't contribute much to the board outside of securing and watching over objectives. Of course, they're contributing to winning or losing, depending on how well they do. Someone has to do it, and like-minded players playing together reduces frustration globally for PvP. Having it work per character would help, as not everyone is as experienced on each character, and generally it is impossible to really choose to be in a position or group you're not supposed to be in. Unless you spend hundreds of games intentionally playing bad, which is an insane commitment to do when playing one match well, will immediately fix where you belong again. Obviously, when it comes to pre-mades, it could be manipulated a little bit, which is why I think when it comes to pre-mades, they should just have a completely different functional system where they are heavily enforced to play against other pre-mades. Obviously, limiting it down to 4 will make it a lot easier for that kind of matchmaking to actually have any sort of functionality. And also, a proposed change for Arena to make it a little bit more competitive is to limit pre-made sizes unless you have a tank and healer in your group to 2. The reason why I say this is that a lot of the stompy pre-mades that happen in Arena that kind of kill Arena completely are the multiple DPS groups. If there's not a tank heal group going, which is kind of hard to form, this DPS queue basically has agency over the entire thing, and they're also more likely to go in solo players because they're all playing DPS. Limiting it down to 2, which means basically making it 2 DPS are allowed to queue together, and if they want a third, they have to have a healer, and if they want a fourth, they have to have a tank, and if they want to do 2 DPS and a tank, that'd be okay. Still pretty oppressive, but you know, that's just how it's going to be. And it'll promote more like tank heal gameplay. Then obviously if there's a solo queue healer or a solo queue tank, and these 2 players in queue, and that'll allow that tank or healer to get a chance to play with some other people, but also at the same time probably put them against a tank heal double DPS pre-made, and or you know, a double DPS pre-made and there just happens to be another tank and healer in queue, making it a tank heal game versus another tank heal game. I think the pre-mades for Venus should be tank heal. 44 DPS is definitely a necessity for the health of the game, but also at the same time, when it comes to 4 players that already know what they're doing and they're playing arena against other 4 DPS players that have just randomly queued up, it's not quite fair. It's not quite fun. And this has been happening since the dawn of time. Obviously, you can't group for it before, but there were definitely instances where people have been coordinated in 4 DPS matches in solo ranked. Sad to say, but it's true. And I'm not here to really talk about like ranked or anything like that, but I do think that would be a great help for arena health, like in general, because it would make the solo queue matches a lot more competitive. It would reduce pre-mades, and at the same time, it would give you a competitive outlet if you did want to play arena competitively. Tank and heal is the most competitive format that you can actually play. Anybody that wants to say otherwise, feel free. Your opinion is completely valid. But when it comes to actual like team play, tank and heal are pretty much mandatory. And of course, I played tons of 4 DPS arenas. I played tank DPS arenas. Hell, I played group rank with a tank and no healer through DPS and won many times against some okay teams. It's not always a necessity, and I totally understand that, but when it comes to the highest level of competitiveness, tank and heal is the way to go. Then obviously with any sort of abuse, players will immediately get put back to where they were if it was a full rework, which would also roll over into arena. It would allow for players that don't really know what they're doing have a lot better chance than just getting globaled instantly. Obviously the damage metrics and healing and stuff, whatever, would have to take into account and separate heal tank matches or heal DPS match and stuff like that, because the damage will be obviously much higher in those kind of matches, which might be a little bit too much work. Now, to point out some solutions besides the ones I have already mentioned here, adding in new set bonuses would help mainly for healers as they need it the most, new tacticals, and fusing or flat out removing and rebalancing classes that have a PvE tactical they're reliant on for competitive damage and uptime for that tactical to do damage. Looking at Ruthless Interrogation for engineering, agitating energies for marksman, spiteful saber for annihilation, prime ignition for arsenal. They just simplify and make their PvE better while changing almost nothing to the class or how it plays, completely missing the concept of what a tactical should probably do. Things like overwhelming offense is one, but there's no simple solution to this. I understand that. Utility tacticals, in my honest opinion, are the way to go, if anything. Not defensive power, not offensive power, but rather, would you want this utility or that utility? Almost as an extra point to your skill tree to take something you simply couldn't afford to take. Damage being lowered across the board is something that could help things, but generally I am against it simply because it feels like regression instead of progression. Regression instead of progression. But with a stat squish, I would accept it and move on and learn how to get used to it. Augment's no longer working in PvP. This would put everyone at a competitive level with each other much easier and reduce the cost of getting into PvP while also relatively hurting the underperforming specs more than the meta ones. An added solution to this ideal is add either actual PvP gear that's non-functional in PvP or preset stat pools for PvP specific enhancements. So leaving everyone's HP, mastery, and power at the same level with the exception of build differences, then making PvP enhancements be the ones that we use to adjust our builds and stats we wish to have. Making them obviously more secondary stat heavy, so classes that require more critical and accuracy can have more of a fighting chance versus those who need critical far less and don't need accuracy at all. An alternate to augments being removed and PvP enhancements being proposed to fix the issues that come with it. It would be simply start a preset stat build that we can swap around. Everyone gets the same amount of stat points and fine-tune theirs how they want, making gear irrelevant when it comes to PvP and having the system replace bolster completely. Giving us a tutorial and a zone to contribute these points and dummies to practice with those said stats so that when we enter PvP we don't have to set up in a minute before going into battle. I think this ultimately is the best the best move, as it includes everyone and creates very niche builds once again. So for example, like stacking a lot of absorption on Assassin Tank. It would simply be a game changer that excites me even thinking about it. And then obviously it would be very easy for them to change PvP a little bit by increasing our stat pools and or just only focusing on like tactical set bonuses and talent choices. And they wouldn't have to worry about gear for them at all, or how the differences between PvE and PvP gear, or, you know, just even making gear for PvP at all. Obviously cosmetics are nice, and we've kind of like gotten cosmetic only stuff from seasons, which is pretty cool. Maybe they not have to worry about the Horizon gear anymore, and that could probably be very, very beneficial. Obviously you would have to go through a front load of a lot of work to get a system like this to work, but I think this would ultimately be the best one, and it would stop a lot of gatekeeping, I guess you could say. A lot of people just don't know how important gear is, and this would solve the problem completely, basically. Then finally, for premates, removing the leaving penalty since ranked is gone, making the mercy rule actually functional, and make it work more aggressively for leaving or point leads, and simply giving solo queue players the option to not be backfilled into games would go a long way for playability versus premade groups being active when matchmaking is failing to pair them against other groups. Anyway, the core mechanics to the game, clarity and sound, is amazing. There are some exceptions, as some things don't have their ability proc sound anymore, and some new abilities that have added benefits that have no visual indicator. Talking about Pyro's energy shield immunity to crowd control. While it should be obvious, it's not always obvious due to the removal of cylinders on buff bars. So if Power Tech player is somewhat inactive, it's hard to tell if they'll be immune or not without hawking their basically buff bar. Nearly all CC immunities have an animation, and this is seemingly the only exception. I don't really want things to change much, and honestly anything on this list being improved would be a win for all of us. But I do have to say this, to some, most of this wouldn't change whether they play PvP or not. Very small part of the game is PvP, and any development they put into it, they're not really seeing returns for doing so, other than getting to say that they have really good PvP, and players recommending the game working as free advertisement. It'd be nice to at least achieve that state once again. We've been in that state before. I would say we're currently not. Then potentially looking at profitability for PvP is something it's basically probably a smart thing to give any justification for PvP being actively worked on. Sadly, that's not the reality of PvP, and it isn't for a lot of other games. Having rated being paywalled could be a good direction, though something more as the community is quite small would definitely help. Nearly all work that's been done to PvP in the past years are a combination of all the devs we have left. Most probably don't even know or care for PvP that much, and that's not why they work there. I can't fault them, I just wish they'd care about us. They don't have to care about PvP, and That's quite hard these days with how vile everyone is to each other, including the devs. I think we're quite honestly at the peak of drama and toxicity since since we last had an active solo ranked community and ranked 4s, which is definitely quite the shame. Anyway, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I hope this video can be used as an educational tool for any unaware about the state of PvP and what can be done, including for the devs. I'm sure at least one will watch this, and I thank you for your effort. Please just let us be heard. That's all we want.